It's Friday, May 23rd. In the headlines this morning, Netanyahu calls out Prime Minister Carney. Trump's coming to Canada. And Danielle Smith wants a pipeline. And public business is just that, public. And New Zealand abandons net zero. All that and a lot more on The Really Big Show. I'm Jim Csek with NowMedia. With me, Iain Burns, our managing editor, out in our nation's capital there.
And again, not very nice here. It's
No.
absolutely bleak. It's more like sort of November weather than it has been for a while. So we're all sad here.
We're all sad. Well, we're going to get right into the news. We got our fancy new intro as well. Yeah, the big news is we got a clip to Prime Minister Netanyahu calls out Prime Minister Carney, as well as the French and the English. We're going to play that clip first of all.
I don't have any audio.
I'm not getting audio.
All right,
Last night in Washington, something horrific happened. A brutal terrorist shot in cold blood a young, beautiful couple, Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Milgram. Yaron had just bought an engagement ring for Sarah. He was planning to give it to her in Jerusalem next week. They were planning to start a new and happy life together. Well, that tragically did not happen. Yaron and Sarah weren't the victims of a random crime. The terrorist who cruelly gunned them down did so for one reason and one reason alone. He wanted to kill Jews. And as he was taken away, he chanted, "Free Palestine." This is exactly the same chant we heard on October 7th. On that day, thousands of terrorists stormed into Israel from Gaza. They beheaded men, they raped women, they burned babies alive, they butchered 1,200 innocent people and took 251 innocent people hostage to the dungeons of Gaza. A short time afterwards, Chancellor Scholz of Germany visited Israel. And after he saw the horrors, he said to me, "These Hamas terrorists are exactly like the Nazis." He was right. And if they could get away with it, these Hamas terrorists would have slaughtered every last Jew on earth. For these neo-Nazis, Free Palestine is just today's version of Heil Hitler. They don't want a Palestinian state. They want to destroy the Jewish state. They want to annihilate the Jewish people who've been in the land of Israel for 3,500 years. I could never understand how this simple truth evades the leaders of France, Britain, Canada, and others. They're now proposing to establish a Palestinian state and reward these murderers with the ultimate prize. Well, for 18 years, we had a de facto Palestinian state. It's called Gaza. And what did we get? Peace? No. We got the most savage slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust.
And you can go and watch that full clip from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Carney has responded there, and we have a tweet here from Mark Carney on the incident. He says he's devastated and appalled.
Not a response to the attack that he,
yeah, just to the attack itself, not to the. He hasn't responded to that, and you've reached out and asked for a response to Netanyahu's comments. France and England have responded so far to the accusation.
I mean, it's very interesting because this is extremely unusual for one world leader, particularly a world leader within the kind of Western sphere, let's call it, as Netanyahu is, to say to another leader in that Western sphere that they're on the wrong side of history, on the wrong side of humanity.
Yeah.
To accuse him of being a hypocrite, to accuse him of propping up Hamas and using Hamas talking points. I mean, it's Suffice it to say, this is not normal. This is really, really strange. And I think what's even more strange is that none of the Canadian media are very interested in it. And we're one of the only ones, a small independent outlet. We're one of the only ones that are reporting on this story. That, in many ways, that's the crazier thing. But I mean, Melanie Jolie was asked a question last night by a couple of reporters. Was asked a question about this, and she just completely ignored it and said, "I'm going to leave that to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister," which means, if you're curious what that means in the political world, it means that an email has been sent round by Katie Telford or someone else that holds the whip, and they've said, "Don't you dare speak about this subject. Don't open your mouth about this subject. Shut up and wait." And Mark Carney's going to say something, and obedient Jolie has obediently agreed to go along with that. And that's probably a consequence of Guilbeault and Gregor Robertson and others making a fool of out of themselves last week. But anyway, so what I would suspect is that Carney or Anand, probably I'd say most likely to be Carney, is going to come out and say something eventually. But right now he's silent, and so is the Canadian press. I mean, the CBC, the finest institution in Canada, apparently, just has absolutely nothing to say about this. The Prime Minister of this country has just been attacked by the Prime Minister of another country in an extraordinary way. Such a weird, unusual event in Canadian history for something like this to happen. And the national broadcaster hasn't got a thing to say about it, just totally incurious. I mean, that is weird.
Yeah, so CTV has the story up, but it is just a repost of a Reuters story. It's not their own story right now that talks about this. And there is a reaction there from the French foreign minister. And that said that that they designate Hamas as a terrorist organization and was unwaveringly committed to Israel's security. But it said it was absurd and slanderous to accuse the supporters of a two-state solution of encouraging anti-Semitism or Hamas. So,
well, I mean, at least they've said something, I guess, because those countries have much more functional and normal media landscapes. Canada is almost like a banana republic or something. It's almost like an authoritarian country in a way. Canada, its media landscape is so denuded, it's so weak and fragile and empty that most people don't even know this has happened, which is just so weird. I mean, the editors at the CBC, CTV, and the rest of it, they really need to have a look at themselves in the mirror. Like, what on earth are they doing? This is not why you get into journalism.
And there is a reaction from the British Armed Forces Minister Luke Pollards, and said London stood with Israel in their right to self-defense, but that self-defense must be conducted within the bounds of international humanitarian law. And it says,
well, this all relates to aid, really, humanitarian aid, and also Israel's progressively sort of to start to move towards this idea that they're just going to take full control of Gaza, and they're going to begin another offensive to make that happen. And the likes of the Liberal Party and the Labour Party in England, they rely quite heavily on voters that are either left-wing and therefore automatically pro-Palestine for some reason. I'm not really sure why that happened, but it happened about 30, 40, maybe 50 years ago now. And then they also have Muslim voters. Muslim voters are overwhelmingly, obviously, pro-Palestine and agitate a lot for that. So they're trying to balance that. Whereas if you look at like Pierre Poilievre, for example, or some other parties in the UK and France, they have no time for Palestine, basically. They're just all in for Israel. So it's very much like a political question, this. It's about what side of the spectrum you're on. And I think it's no coincidence that the leaders of France, the UK, and Canada are all basically centre-left, they would call themselves. I mean,
Anita Anand
it's a problem that these parties have had for years now, trying to figure out how to deal with this issue.
Anita Anand had some comments that we've talked about in the past, too, that were basically appeared to be one-sided. We have some.
Yeah, she bought into a bogus report from the UN that's been discredited and retracted now. But it was, Anita Anand wasn't quite smart enough to catch that, unfortunately for Canada.
We have a commentary here from Chris Cuomo, former CNN anchor. We're just going to listen to his commentary on the violence being not only this, but the violence in general that the left has kind of been a part of. I'm going to play this clip from Chris.
Is a far left activist caught on camera shouting "Free Palestine," and as he was arrested, he kept chanting the slogan and said, "I did it for Gaza." So why the F are all these people on the left saying "if true"? And if that's who he is, and if he's not an IDF plant, and you don't want any of the blame for what just happened on you? He is described as what he is. He said what he said. Stop asking why people who understand what we're up against, like Douglas Murray, caution Joe Rogan against his comic buddies bashing Israel for sport and to develop a following. Prosecutors allege this guy fired nearly 24 bullets in this attack because he wanted to kill as many as he could. And we know what's feeding the fire, right? Don't pretend to not know what this is about.
There you go. You can go watch Chris Cuomo. He goes into it for quite a while there. So
that's why, people like Chris Cuomo are called journalists, but is he a journalist? To be a journalist, you have to pass exams. And one of those exams is about the law. It's about our legal system, the centerpiece of which is innocent until proven guilty. But Cuomo obviously is just like, this guy here, as he shot him, he murdered. It's just, I mean, I know he's just like, I guess he's too big and important to obey the most basic rules of journalism. But that's the reason that people haven't said it was this guy, because we believe in the presumption of innocence. It's the absolute cornerstone of Western civilization. It's quite important. But it is correct to say that the man who has been accused of this crime is a left-wing activist who's written extensively about how sad it is that more white people are starting to move to Seattle. Just a completely bizarre thing to say, but okay. And how upset he is about Israel's supposed genocide in Gaza and all the rest of it. I mean, and he was a member of some kind of socialist organization as well. So, I mean, he's obviously, the man that's been accused of it is obviously a left-wing activist, but that socialist group has tried to distance themselves from him and completely disowned him. But yeah, it's an interesting point because as it stands, this man who's accused of this crime, it's starting to shape up like it would, like the case against him by prosecutors will be that he's a left-wing terrorist, which is an interesting problem for the likes of CNN and The Guardian and so on to have to deal with.
Yeah, I did watch the news conference with the U.S. attorney, former Fox anchor, or talk show host, Jeannie Pirro, and said that they were looking at a full range of charges, including a terrorist act.
Yeah, well, I mean, he also released the man, again, who's been arrested and accused of this crime, has supposedly released a manifesto that has his name on it. And a few people have said that it was written by him. And it is, it's, if that's verified, if that's true, then that will certainly be used to try and accuse him of terrorism, because it does have the usual sort of points that a terrorist would make. If being a terrorist is to try and commit violence to further a political end, then certainly, yeah, you'd think terrorism would be among the charges.
Yeah, and to strike out against just the public as well, to create fear.
But I mean, it was a specific kind of ethnic subpopulation of the public, wasn't it? He went to a Jewish museum, to kill Jews, didn't he? Let's be honest. Allegedly. Sorry.
Donald Trump confirms, the White House confirms that Trump is coming to Canada for the G7 Leader Summit. It's a good thing Jagmeet Singh is not the NDP leader, because he was trying to block Donald Trump from entering Canada. Do you remember that?
I do, yeah. And maybe he's gonna go there with a big you know, placard thing saying "Down with Trump."
What is Jagmeet doing these days? Hanging out at the airport with his, as Kay Desjardins says, with a Versace bag, or was it a Gucci bag, with his Rolex watch and driving his BMW, while opining about how he supports the middle class worker.
Middle class, yeah. Well, he would even say working class, or you know, middle class was a bit too wealthy for the sort of people that he tried to advertise himself to. While he was obviously a kind of aristocrat that was chauffeured around the land and starting fights with the public while the RCMP stand there ready to protect you.
Down. One of his biggest moments there, where he actually tried to start a fight while he knew he had the 3 police officers in the back that were probably even chuckling in their own, because they didn't do anything. But there you go.
Yeah.
And then here's an opinion piece written by Laurie Goldstein that maybe has some hope for the Canada and the Prime Minister. It says he's a no-nonsense kind of a business guy, and he's not giving the same amount of, I guess, latitude that Trudeau did, where he actually demands punctuality and he makes decisions, and he doesn't leave stuff rot on his desk for weeks and months, and he doesn't wait for Katie Telford to tell him what to do.
I certainly get that impression. I don't think that this is just wild speculation here. I mean, and I also just now, I listened to, and it's well worth it. If there are any sort of like news nerds out there who consume Canadian news all day long, I would advise you go and watch the new Minister of Energy.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that right away too.
Yeah. His name is Hodgson. Yeah, he was just in Calgary, and you know, he's an old chum of Carney. He's worked at Goldman Sachs and Bank of Canada, I believe, at the same time as Carney. He was at Goldman Sachs, but certainly at the Bank of Canada. And the way he was speaking, you know, it sounded like a Tory. He sounded like somebody in Stephen Harper's cabinet, if not Stephen Harper himself. So
we've talked about how the Carney cabinet is full of people that haven't really accomplished much, and we would have to give a proviso to him, because he has been accomplished, and he is likely one of the people that is more experienced to lead a portfolio like that. And we'll talk about it here in a bit.
Totally.
Yeah, we'll talk about him in a bit. But yeah, it also says that one of the officials in this story said Carney does not suffer fools. Well, he's got a lot of fools to deal with there, so we'll see. And they said that there may be cabinet shuffles in less than a year. I would say if he doesn't suffer fools, he's going to have a cabinet shuffle very, very soon, because it's going to be hard to keep the fools in line.
Well, there's a couple of high-profile fools, and I you know, I hate to pick on him, but Francois Philippe Champagne is a bit of a fool, isn't he? And so is Melanie Joly. Sorry guys. Sorry Mel. Sorry France. But you're both just a bit ridiculous, aren't you? I can't imagine they're going to last very long.
And leading that group would be, in my mind, Stephen Guilbeault.
Oh yeah, Guilbeault is almost like, I don't know if he's just there. He's just there to kind of appease a certain kind of Quebec voter or something. I get the impression that's why he's there. But also he committed, like Carney did something very, very stupid, and something that really isn't pragmatic, in that he committed to deciding who was going to govern this country based on their DNA, based on whether they were male or female. That's a bit stupid, you know, this 50-50 sex balance thing. Because in any given situation, if you just select a group of like a few dozen people, it's very unlikely that talent is going to be perfectly distributed 50-50 between the sexes, or 50-50 between anything like that, like ethnicity, or, you know, whether or not you like Bruce Springsteen, whatever it is. That's not really a good or clever way to arrange the leadership of a country. So as a consequence of that, he's forced to pick people who might be incompetent, but he has to have them because it's a man, or he has to have it because it's a woman. I mean, he's backed himself into a corner there, and it's a little bit ridiculous. But I don't know, we'll see. I certainly I certainly don't think Guilbeault. I don't think his position is tenable. Maybe he'll get like a downgrade or something, or it might just be the case that Carney has him in the cabinet, but he just never listens to him. He just kind of sends him off to Quebec to sort of talk gibberish, and then does the exact opposite of what Guilbeault recommends. But then the other one, obviously, is who we talk about a lot, and who is obviously a diehard listener of this show, which is Chrystia Freeland. She has a terrible habit of putting her foot in her mouth and sounding ridiculous and out of touch. But she's not been on the. We've not seen her. You know, she's not done anything yet. She's been like banished. But eventually, she's going to have to come out and say something, and yeah, that might lead to a few thumbs down from the public. So she might also get sort of moved on. But obviously, Carney really likes her, doesn't he? And he's good friends with her, so that'll be a tricky one.
She's been keeping her head down, that's for sure. You can't get into trouble if you just keep your mouth shut and keep your head down, I guess.
Totally, yeah. But like eventually, obviously, transport. They tried to talk it up, didn't they? Because she was obviously demoted. She had the second biggest job in government. You know, in many ways, she was almost like the actual prime minister under Justin Trudeau, while Trudeau went around hugging people and doing the sort of PR side of things. And she's been demoted now to transport. But a lot of people have been trying to say, no, look, that is actually a big job, everyone. It's okay. And that is right, isn't it? It is a big job. So as a consequence, she's going to have to say something at some point. So we will see her. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of nice gaffes. So we can ask that question then, whether or not she should hang around.
So they had that Western Premier Summit, and Danielle Smith has put out a tweet there and say, over the past 2 days in Yellowknife, she met with the premiers. And obviously what she wants is the interprovincial trade barriers gone. But more so than anything is that energy corridor and a pipeline. And that's going to be her push. And we talked about it yesterday. If you want to quell separatist movements, give Alberta its pipeline. And then, there were some good words, and we're going to talk about it later from the environment minister there, or the energy minister.
Oh, the energy minister, yeah. The environment minister seems to be quite unpopular in Alberta. It was strange, this conference of the Western premiers, because they were mostly all on the same page, except for David Eby.
Yeah.
And it was a bit painful because he was sat next to Danielle Smith in the little press conference at the end. And he came out and he was like saying, he basically said in politician speak, he said, like, why should we build more pipelines when the Trans Mountain expansion isn't even at maximum capacity yet? So, like, a Guilbeault line, vintage Guilbeault. And, Danielle Smith was sat there and she was not best pleased. And nor was Scott Moore, really. He was kind of saying similar sort of things. But it's just, yeah, I mean, David Eby has obviously set himself up to be an obstacle there, or at least to sound like he's an obstacle. But what he basically said was, if the federal government builds another pipeline, then all right. But he's basically just surrendering that. He's just saying it's going to have to be the federal government. Like, we're not gonna participate. So he's going to try and kind of like wash his hands of it. But he's reliant. It's terrible for British Columbia. Actually, in fact, it's terrible for Canada, because he's reliant on a fringe pressure group masquerading as a political party called the BC Green Party. He's reliant on them to save his skin in tight votes, and has done a deal with them. So, they are obviously they're gonna despise anything to do with natural resources, or just anything to do with concrete building things. They're not gonna like that, are they? So Eby's in this like fragile position, and therefore so is Canada, because Eby is theoretically in charge of our access to the Pacific Ocean. Crazy old country we live in.
I think he also gets a little bit of leeway there with the 3 defected Conservative Party ones that likely don't want to see an election right away.
That is true, but in their own self-interest, one might surmise or argue. But I don't know. They're obviously unpredictable people, aren't they? That trio, because they left a party and now they're doing unpredictable things. So one of the unpredictable things they might do is vote down the government in a confidence vote. It might happen.
Yep.
So I mean, Eby anyway isn't going to be. He's not going to be feeling strong, is he? And on numerous occasions now, he's said, we might lose this confidence vote, in which case we're going back for another election. Like, he said it, he's aware of it, he knows how vulnerable he is.
So more than half of Canadians now, in a poll, said they understand why Alberta wants to separate. I mean, you'd have to be kind of like brain dead not to understand it, for sure, after Alberta's been treated like, we talk about it all the time, treated like the ugly stepsister. Well, Cinderella, it brings home, does all the work and brings home the bacon for Canada.
Yeah, and then David Eby, the Premier of British Columbia, who's one of the sort of blockers, one of the groups in Canada that kind of thwarts Alberta. He has the goal to then say that Western Canada is the engine of the Canadian economy, as if it's got anything to do with British Columbia. So I don't know. I mean, I think that might also explain why Alberta is so unhappy, that even their economic contribution, their credibility there is being stolen by one of the blockers.
Bizarre. And then, like some of the reasons that they were blocking it, the Liberal government, was obviously the net zero goals. And here's New Zealand now abandoning net zero.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so now they're going to start some offshore drilling and stuff like that. So we're seeing that with all the banks abandoning this net zero alliance, some countries. Obviously, the United States has abandoned it. They've moved away from
New Zealand, like, get an atlas out, or just go on Google Maps and look at New Zealand. Look how isolated that country is. How stupid would you have to be to make yourself reliant on another country or other countries for energy when you're in that situation, when you're that isolated? It's like these people just don't know anything, do they? They've not read anything. I mean, why did we defeat Japan in the Second World War? There are many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that they didn't have their own energy. They didn't have their own natural resources. They were reliant on other countries. So you could isolate them, stop them from obtaining the energy that they needed to fight the war. Obviously, that's a war, and I'm not saying we're going to go into a war, but it's just so stupid, isn't it? If you've got the opportunity, if you can get your own energy out of the ground, why would you choose not to do that? It's just madness, isn't it?
I would say there's not a war coming, but there is an AI revolution coming that eats energy. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, and it's all about energy. Like, the future is all about energy. It's absolutely all about energy. And we'll talk, like I said, we're going to come back to that, though. There's some experts that say that Ottawa has to allow the home prices to fall to make housing more affordable. Obviously, Canadians will not like that, especially the homeowners right now, because most Canadian wealth is tied up in their real estate.
And most Canadians own homes rather than rent. Which is something that's a sort of fact that's often obscured in the discourse about housing. But that's what, there's a professor in here. I think he's a professor or associate professor or something like that, an academic, in this article that says it absolutely must happen. House prices must come down if there's any intention whatsoever of allowing the next generation or next generations to have their own houses. Like, it must occur. But the problem is that a government can't explicitly attempt to do that. So they can't say, we're going to bring house prices down, we're going to do this, because then the homeowners would revolt. But it's a lot of people then, they in that situation, in this discourse, a lot of people then say, oh, those selfish boomers, like those selfish people that have a home. But it's not really that simple, is it? Because, as you said, it's more than just a home. It's basically the only asset that most people have. It's it's everything for them. It's like a pension, it's a savings account, it's everything. It's their stock, Because
in the U.S., a lot of people's wealth is tied up in stocks and stuff like that. In Canada, it's mostly in their real estate. And right now, people that have bought homes in the last 5 years, most of them are underwater. So that means they owe more money than they could sell that home for. That's the dangerous part of this whole thing. That's the dangerous part. And if house prices go down more, that would mean tons and tons of foreclosures. Because at some point, you're not going to want to pay a mortgage on $1 million home that's worth $500,000. Like, your best bet is to walk away.
Yeah. And a lot of people also leverage, don't they, their equity
Yeah.
to do things like start a business or whatever it may be. Like
Yeah.
there are pretty sound economic arguments
And that's
against bringing house prices down. But that in itself, if you don't do anything, that's also tragic, because then there's no way for younger people to get homes.
And I do understand what the housing minister, Gregor Robertson, was kind of trying to say, he just didn't say it very well, is that we kind of need to find a balance where like house prices kind of like stabilize at a certain rate, and then we bring up supply so that, as you know, like we won't see an inflationary increase in housing prices, but we'll see more stability where the housing supply can catch up to the demand. I mean, that is realistically, it's basically supply and demand economics, right? We obviously have a shortage of homes, and we need to, because we're even not building enough homes. Like those numbers aren't that high. And some of the solutions being pitched by the government, Mark Carney, and people like Olivia Chow, is to build shoeboxes for people, or sea cans, or modular homes. It's not really in the the second largest land mass in the world to tell people that they have to live in 300 square feet.
Yeah, I mean, that's especially a country like Canada, which is very reliant on immigration, because for decades now, the federal government and the provincial governments have been completely uninterested in the fact that Canadians have stopped having children, and that the population is incapable of replacing itself. So, which is an economic catastrophe by itself. But because of that, Canada relies on immigration to keep its economy functioning. I mean, beyond economy, to keep the whole society functioning. But immigrants don't come to Canada to live in a box, do they? They come to Canada because it's supposed to be a country where you can have a bigger house and nicer, nicer stuff, basically.
You could stay in England if you wanted that, right? You could stay in the UK if you wanted that.
Absolutely, or wherever else. Well, India would be the number one nowadays. India is obviously grown at a massive clip. The economy has grown quite significantly, and they have better weather in India, and you could argue better food and stuff like that. Like, it's not a given that Indians are going to want to come here, and that is basically now the economic strategy of the Canadian elite, is to basically get people from places like India to come in instead of trying to encourage Canadians to have kids. So I don't know. It's not an easy one.
We have some
not an easy one at all.
We have some BC and actually no, not yet. But sex offender Randall Hoppley rearrested in BC on the same day he was freed from prison. John Rustad putting out lots of tweets on this as well. So Vancouver police rearrested the high-risk sex offender Randall Hoppley on the same day that he was released from prison.
Big Randall? Done loads of stories on Randall. He's basically like a celebrity in British Columbia at this point. What's amazing is that he abducted a 3-year-old boy in, what was it, in the Kootenays or something like that? I think it was the Kootenays.
In 2011, yeah.
And he only got, let's see if it says, he only got 6 years for that. Abducted a 3-year-old boy and got 6 years for that. It sort of highlights, doesn't it, the problems with the justice system. The problems that are so severe that people notice it, that's when there's a problem. And the public is noticing this, and they're saying, what? Like, how is this guy out again, and why are these sentences so light?
Doesn't make sense. There's a delegation to meet with Mark Carney. It's a quintet of U.S. senators in Ottawa today. 1 Republican and 4 Democratic representatives, including Hillary Clinton's 2016 running mate, Tim Kaine. And they're here to discuss defense, trade, and a deep bipartisan support for strong U.S.-Canadian relations.
Tim Kaine makes the other Tim look rather bad, doesn't he? Even though Tim Kaine in that election just did nothing, really. I don't know if you can remember that, 2016. He was barely visible. It was all about Hillary.
Yeah, I do. I don't even remember his name. That's how much he's so memorable. I don't remember him at all. Tim Walz will be memorable for a long time to come, and not for the right reasons. Poor Tim Walz.
No, he's definitely not.
He just doesn't know when to take his foot out of his mouth.
But yeah, these senators anyway, I think they're from the Foreign Relations Committee or something like that in the Senate. These committees are quite powerful in the American political system. So it is, it is quite consequential potentially. But one of the statements that they released before arriving is they're saying that they want to, they want to continue to strengthen the U.S.-Canada relationship and all this sort of stuff. And it's just like, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to get into it too much, but how on earth do you repair that from the U.S. side? It's a desperate situation, isn't it? Really, because one of the probably the best friendship that the Americans have ever had has just been trashed by Trump, hasn't it?
Yeah. Tory MP submits a petition to end the temporary foreign worker program. And not even Justin Trudeau said that was a point that he made as well. So there you go. And he said it is a large contributor to unsustainable levels of immigration, suppresses wages across Canada.
It never ceases to amaze me that Trudeau is the one that it took Justin Trudeau to say that. That sort of tells you something about political discourse in Canada. That pretty much the most left-wing major politician in Canada at the time, he's the guy that had to say that, because the right were just kind of neutered, weren't they? They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to approach that subject because they were scared that somehow it would be, it would be associated with like xenophobia or racism or something. Hence as well why the guy that's done this, isn't Pierre Poilievre. Yeah. It isn't somebody with pale skin. It's somebody of an immigrant background.
Are you saying the left-leaning media would attack them if they dared say anything?
It seems to be that way, doesn't it? And that certain very unpleasant motives would be imputed to them. But that's also the case with Trudeau. Obviously, Trudeau could only have done that where he came out and said these are too many immigrants, they're undercutting wages, they're like overloading hospitals and houses and all the rest of it. Like really sort of like old-fashioned anti-mass immigration rhetoric. He could only do that because of his reputation as a very left-wing, very liberal anyway, very culturally left-wing guy. Whereas had somebody like Andrew Scheer or whatever come out and said that, that it just wouldn't have sailed, would it?
No, absolutely. But also with Trudeau, he could almost say anything. Like it was hard to understand what he said most of the time.
No, I mean he could say anything and he could get away with anything. Like for example, the fact that he couldn't even remember how many times he dressed up as an Indian person or an Arab and put blackface on and a turban and all the rest of it. Couldn't even remember, and still remained the prime minister when that was revealed. He remained the prime minister for another 6 years after that. It's 2019, wasn't it, when that was revealed? That nobody else could have done that. Nobody else that I can imagine could have done that. Again,
in Canada, the national media is definitely. I mean, if there was a Fox News in Canada, they would be a lot tougher. They're like a right-leaning media, national media. When our national media is typically left, CBC and CTV. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So some of the businesses, the judge said public business is public. And this is after, when people share videos from, this is the ruling by the Saskatchewan commissioner, came out in a case. A provincial board had threatened sanctions over posting of a videotaped hearing on YouTube. And the commissioner said the right of access is unqualified. The head of the institution does not have the right to place restrictions on how an applicant uses or discloses the released records. There you go. The censorship of the internet.
It's good to see, isn't it?
The censorship of the internet. It seems odd that even boards would want to kind of censor what people can put up. Obviously, they didn't like what was being put out there. They didn't like what they were saying in public, to the public, to be shared with the public.
I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? Look, the board initially refused, instead suggesting that citizens apply for a transcript.
Yeah.
Just so that it can be fiddled with, a cynic might suggest.
You know what I mean? It's like the public is not entitled to public information. And that's, like
there's a real problem with that. And BC is like one of the worst offenders, really. I mean, but it's obviously it's not just BC; it's everywhere. Federal government is pretty bad for it as well.
Yeah, and then we have to be really careful what's going to go on with this Bill C-63. And Bill C-18 still, I mean, I don't want to harp on it again today, but Bill C-18, the only G7 nation in the world that has news blocked on Meta's Instagram and Facebook, still to this day. And it cripples media outlets and also has them at the begging bowl for the federal Liberal government to do their bidding while they beg for money.
While the Liberal government pours millions and millions of dollars into Facebook's bank account so that it can put its adverts on there.
At the same time, yeah. At the same time. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense.
A wee bit hypocritical.
We've ranted about that too many times. We won't do it today. The food professor, he says this week's food inflation data is deeply concerning. Canada now has the highest food inflation in the G7. I wonder if Chrystia Freeland is going to take that stat and try to work that, excluding Japan. While the U.S. continues to see its decline, ours is moving in the opposite direction. And that's why Carney likely limited those tariffs coming into the country. I mean, when Canada puts tariffs on, it actually hurts the consumer. That's who gets hurt. The tariffs being put on by Trump hurts his consumers and our industry.
Yeah, it's an import tax.
Yeah.
That's why it should be called. It should probably just be known as an import tax. It's it's a lot more clarity, isn't there, when you use that term rather than tariff.
Yeah, for sure. That's the way it should be talked about. Look at that. They did a recount there, and the Liberals got close, but the Conservative candidate did hang on to that riding.
4 votes, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, that's just unfathomably tight, isn't it? It's quite crazy.
They did find lots of Liberal votes, though. And a lot of Green ones were disqualified. It's just odd that the findings, like, well, how come so many in all these ridings? Statistically, it seems odd. But what do I know about stats?
It's also an interesting riding, isn't it, Windsor, for the Tories to have won, considering how much effort both the NDP and the Liberals put into trying to talk up Windsor and Windsor's primary employer, which is the auto industry.
Well, of great fame was the 351 Windsor Ford engine, when the Detroit was the machine of the United States. There you go.
It was the richest city in the world, I think, by in terms of income. And so all those other ones around there, like like Gary, Indiana, Cleveland, all those cities, which are now not, they've seen many better days. But they used to be like the richest places in the world.
I think it was around 1980. I read a book. It was called On a Clear Day You Can See GM. And GM was the #1 corporation in the world. It was the leader, the top of the pile, the big dog. And the Detroit was the engine or the heartbeat. And they called it the heartbeat of America. It was the heartbeat of industry right there. I mean, don't forget the United States Industrial Revolution starts with Henry Ford and the Model T, the assembly line. That is the part of the Industrial Revolution, right? So the auto sector quite depressed in the U.S. and obviously a lot of the automakers went to different places, Mexico, Canada, different places around the world. And now there's lots more competition with Japanese and obviously lots in the Asia markets, and the Europeans make a heck of a vehicle as well.
And now their big car maker, which is Tesla, or their big new boy anyway, the one that seems to have the most life in it, seems to be very biased towards warm weather locations, doesn't it? Like Texas and California, and that's true of a lot of other industries now. They're increasingly going to Texas. And I think something that really sucks for Detroit is that it doesn't really have very good weather, does it?
Well, one of the big reasons for Texas is I think it's zero tax, and so is Florida, and like state taxes, and lots of industries have flocked to Texas for sure.
Yeah, but in general as well in America, there's a kind of migration to what they call the Sun Belt, isn't there? That's happening on a pretty massive scale. So it's quite hard, I think. Detroit and all the rest of it, they're already in a bad way. They're already suffering. And then it's like a spiral down. And then they also have to fight against this sort of geographical prejudice that a lot of skilled workers have.
That was kind of the heartbeat of America, that whole thing in there, Detroit, Chicago, and all those places. Chicago O'Hare Airport, I think, still is one of the hubs of the United States for airlines. But the crime rates are so bad, and there's parts in Detroit that I don't even think the police or the ambulances want to go into. And you can buy homes, this was a while ago, for next to nothing, for $3,000, but I don't know if you'd want it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I've been to both of those airports, Detroit and Chicago, but didn't want to walk around. That sort of tells you a lot, doesn't it? That a lot of people do give those places a miss. So I think Chicago's got some sort of good things going for it, for sure.
The windy city. There you go. Trump put out a couple of tweets. He went after Tim Cook, and he said he wants all the iPhones that are sold in the United States to be manufactured and built in the U.S., not India or anyplace else. And he said he threatens him with a 25% tariff. And Tim Cook has said that he's going to put about $500 billion into building, and I think it's in Texas as well, manufacturing plant. And also Trump went after the European Union again this morning with a 50% tariff. We're going to play this clip here from Scott Bassett here.
Thanks for being here.
Morning, Bill.
On what has turned out to be a rather busy news day. And good morning to you. You were just in Canada the last few days meeting with members of the G7, the EU, and I want to get into all of that. But with regard to this move on the EU, how bad was the conversation in Canada to lead to this?
Well, the conversation in Canada was fine. The problem is the lead up to that. The 90-day pause on the April 2nd tariffs was based on countries or trade blocs coming to us and negotiating in good faith. And I believe the president believes that the EU proposals have not been of the same quality that we've seen from our other important trading partners. I've said there are 18 important trade deals that we have to do. I'm working mostly on Asia, and that group has move forward with some very interesting proposals. They're negotiating in good faith. We've already inked a deal with the UK. I think there are a couple more coming in the near future. So I think this is in response just to the EU's pace.
Let me get back to that in a moment. I mentioned June 1st is 9 days away. Is there an opportunity for negotiations in these 9 days?
Well, I'm not going to negotiate on TV, but I would hope that this would light a fire under the EU, because, Bill, I've said before, EU has a collective action problem here. It's 27 countries, but they're being represented by this one group in Brussels. So some of the feedback that I've been getting is that the underlying countries don't even know what the EU is negotiating on their behalf.
On Apple, there is more news, too, on that. OK, here we go on True.
There you go. It is, like a lot of the countries have made some comments outside of that, because the EU obviously is a collective, and that's why the UK, which was part of the EU, made their own deal.
It's also one of the reasons that the British people voted to leave the European Union, because every single time an event like this occurred, it'd be the same old characters would meet up in Brussels, and the same old cliques, usually a sort of Franco-German stitch up, and the British were left there, not very happy about it.
You can liken it to even the provinces here in Canada, where like if you're one of the favored one in this group of this clique, you're obviously getting the better or the more powerful ones, France and stuff like that. Whereas like Alberta gets the bad end of the stick, Italy may get the bad end of the stick, and Poland and such like that. So when you're part of this, there is. Just like everything, it's a double-edged sword. You get strength from bargaining together, but you also get a lot of weakness and favoritism, I'm sure, that shows up for certain nations and not others.
Yeah, well, definitely during the Eurozone crisis, that was obvious. When the Germans, who were the real bosses of the EU, they forced the Greeks to adopt a fiscal arrangement that they didn't want in Greece, and that wasn't suitable for the Greek economy. And then they also obviously maintain the euro at a very sort of high value, which benefited the Germans, but the Greeks obviously didn't want that. The Greeks were stuck with this crazy currency that just had no relationship to the Greek economy whatsoever. They had a currency that was more valuable than the dollar, but an economy that had fallen to pieces and relied on tourism. It was a nightmare. And that's when people thought the European Union was going to collapse, but somehow it survived.
Trump's new big, beautiful bill, as he calls it, may have more surprises in there for Canadian companies, tax increases. And this is, they've talked about this, that because Canada implemented that digital services tax targeting U.S. social giants in his new big, beautiful bill, Trump put out a provision that allows them to increase withholding taxes paid by Canadians who own U.S. securities, and that's on the dividends and that are paid out. So that would be going up from 15% to 50%. That would be huge, right? So something to watch for in there. We got
the digital services tax, Bill C-18, is basically another one of those, isn't it? A digital services tax. So journalists, at least some journalists in Canada, would kind of want the pressure to be put on there, I would imagine.
Like us.
Indeed. Let's not beat around the bush. Yeah.
That's right. Let's just be honest. Bill C-18 is crippling local media outlets to the point where they have to beg, and where the Liberal government selectively funds some with crumbs and does not others. And meanwhile, the CBC gets to stick its face in the trough. That's how it works. CBC trough, everybody else in the crumb, a select group in the crumb category, and the rest with their knee on their throat.
It ain't fair.
That's what it looks like. If anybody wants to be honest about it, that's exactly what it is. The CBC gets the feet at the trough of your tax dollars, my tax dollars. And they gave themselves a raise as soon as Carney won. They got a big jump in their budget. And what did the first thing they did? The executives gave themselves a raise, not for the reporters, but for themselves. So they stuck their face in the trough and started gobbling. The rest of the media outlets, the selected ones, the selected other outlets, are begging for crumbs with the QJCO while they selectively decide who gets the crumbs. And then the other tier, us, is they have their knee on your throat. They took away your audience and your ability to get information out there, and said, we're here to help, while they're choking you to death.
And while they have access to that resource that we're forbidden to have access to.
Yeah, and then, they basically, again, fund the competition. Fund our competition while they choke us out. How's that? That's in Canada. That's the free and independent media operating here in Canada. That's the landscape, Mr. Prime Minister.
And by a completely weird, random coincidence, it just happens to be the case that the CBC, which benefits most from this arrangement, is generally considered to be favourable to the Liberal Party. That's just one of those weird coincidences, isn't it? You see that quite a lot throughout history, but very peculiar, isn't it, when something is as coincidental as that occurs.
And I've talked to some other outlets, and most of the outlets don't even want to squeak about Bill C-18 because they need the crumbs to survive. They're barely making it, and they're losing ground. Go look at the stock chart of Chorus. Go take a look at Global. Go take a look at the stock chart. Go take a look at the stock chart of any of those ones that are publicly traded. They're barely alive. The Winnipeg Free Press, I think they got $2.8 million in this arrangement. Who do you think? They were actually doing, we did the story, they were actually doing articles at that time that actually had looked very similar to Mark Carney's campaign ads. Imagine that.
But it also puts them in a position, even if they're not political, it puts them in this terrible, awkward position where they're going to want the Liberals to win that election that we just had, because that means that their reporters' salaries are going to be subsidized to the tune of 35% or whatever per reporter. Obviously, you're going to want that party to win, aren't you? Even if you're not a Liberal, you're going to want that to happen. So that is such a horrible position to put journalists in and editors in.
Oh. Well, the CBC gets better than that, though, because the executives right away, they're the first ones at the dinner table, right? They're first ones at the dinner table, and they slopped most of the money into their own bowls.
Yeah, they get 100% subsidy, don't they? Not just 35%.
Yeah, and they slopped when they got that. They said that Canadians didn't really like all that, and Catherine Tate didn't like that, having to answer to why she took a bonus while she laid off a whole bunch of staff just before Christmas. Decided that bonuses are a bad idea, so they just added to the salaries because they said they were underpaid.
Well, people like Catherine Tate, they're such high flyers. They're such high ability people.
Yeah.
That obviously they just look at that as ridiculous, don't they? It's like, you obviously have to pay me huge amounts of money.
So
look how good CBC is. Look how good a job I'm doing.
and how's this for ludicrous? So CBC is supposedly a Canadian institution. That's how they campaigned on it in the election, and how they say the CBC because it's a Canadian institution. But there was no Canadian worthy enough to run it, so they had to go to the U.S. to get Catherine Tate.
Yeah, and she occasionally came to Canada as well, didn't she? Which was a great privilege that we
isn't that
all benefit
ludicrous?
from.
You're saying you have this Canadian institution, we need Canadian content with Canadian culture, and you actually hired an American to run it.
Oh, was she actually American, or she lived in America? I can't remember. I think she might have been Canadian, but
I might have got that wrong. I'm pretty sure she's an American, but I don't know. She definitely had roots to the United States. You can ask your friend while I'm doing this next lead. And we got some BC and local news here to tell. We got a little intro for that as well. No intro. Look at that. BC First Nations fears protests and conflict over fast-track legislation. So there's a warning shot over the bow for David Eby.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way this is framed gave me quite an enjoyable chuckle. The idea that the First Nations they fear this might happen. Like, they're really scared. It's like, guys, we're worried. That's not the right verb. The right verb is BC First Nations threaten protests, isn't it? Basically, that's what they're saying. They're saying, don't push your luck, or we'll go back to that nightmare of 5 or 6 years ago when the railway was blocked. And many other nightmares, like at that LNG facility in, I can't remember where it was now, Terrace or something, wasn't it? But that's what it is. It's a threat, isn't it? It's saying, fix this or there'll be trouble.
And then, to be fair, I'm going to go back. Catherine Tate is a Canadian, but she lived in the United States and got all of her kind of experience working for a New York-based media company. That's where I got that. So there you go.
I got a degree as well from an American university, Boston University.
Right. Well, there you go. American ties.
Well, many years in America, yeah. It's kind of but we've already seen, haven't we, with Mike Myers, that doesn't matter. You can choose America or Neil Young as well. In the case of Neil Young, you can choose the United States, live there for 60 years or whatever it is, in the case of Neil Young. But you can still say you're Canadian. You can still wade in and say, tell Canadians how to vote and stuff like
that. This Ostrich Farm getting lots and lots of attention. We've been sent so many articles on it and so many pleas for help. The RCMP now monitoring the BC Ostrich Farm to ensure there's no criminal behavior. This is where there's an order there to cull these birds, right? And there's a bunch of protesters gathering to oppose that cull. And it's about a flock of 400 of these large birds.
Obviously, these protesters have never had an ostrich burger, have they?
I remember when I was working as a young accountant, when I first got out of school, I was working in a CA firm, and people were just getting into this in Canada. And it was up to, I remember, because a lot of the doctors had excess money when a lot of our practice was doctors and that. And they would invest in ostrich eggs, $50,000 for an egg that you didn't even know was going to hatch or not, right?
Wow.
And they were billed out to be building all this stuff with ostrich leather. There's so many business cases of why this investment in ostriches was a big deal. But yeah, they were selling eggs at that time for $50,000. You make a heck of an omelet out of one of those too.
I've seen a video of that being done. I mean, it's one of those kind of somewhat exotic meats, isn't it? You sometimes do see it in restaurants and stuff. But
I mean, obviously, this is a big investment for
they are very they're very like majestic creatures. It's very strange when you actually go face to face with one. It does feel a little bit feels like they're from another geological era or something. Feels like they're from the Cretaceous period or something like that. But
they're a massively elegant bird for sure. I mean, they are, and obviously these people are trying to save these birds, and there's a lot of people out there trying to save them, and they've actually stirred up quite a few people to kind of hang on to these birds instead of them getting culled. Culled is a nice word that means destroyed or killed, I guess.
I feel like destroyed is a euphemism as well, where they say the dog was destroyed. Like, you mean given an injection of poison or something like that so that it died. Killed is the word, isn't it?
Yeah, so they, we're watching that story as well. And then SRI Homes in Kelowna here shuts down the Lake Country plant, citing rising costs. We're seeing this more and more as businesses fold in British Columbia. It says it's going to permanently close a modular home manufacturing facility in Lake Country, citing unsustainable market condition and rising operating costs. They should have stuck around for Mark Carney's $25 billion slush fund that's going to get created. I shouldn't say slush fund that is going to be created for modular home builders. Or maybe that's already spoken for. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, this is dreadful timing. I don't understand. But obviously for them to do this, they must have reached the very end. I doubt they made it as a sort of optional choice. But it is ironic you mentioned that. 25 billion. It's actually 35 billion, isn't it? I think one's 25, one's 10.
25 billion for the modular home builders, and another 10 billion for the low income homes, which is likely modular homes as well.
Yeah. But it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was just praising Tim Hodgson, the new energy minister, I don't know. I mean, I was referring to him as sounding like very pragmatic kind of guy, like a business guy. One of the things that he said in Calgary was the government is really bad at allocating capital. The best people that can possibly allocate capital are in this room, he said, speaking to all the business people in Calgary. It's a bit funny, isn't it, that his government is doling out this $35 billion. I mean, that's one of the biggest allocations of capital by a government in recent history, isn't it?
Yeah, it's and Brookfield happens to be one of the largest modular home builders. That they purchased that just recently as well. Imagine that. Lucky, I guess.
Good timing. Another one of those coincidences, isn't it?
Just lucky. Just lucky. Trump signed a thing with the. Well, look at the markets first, though. The markets just basically. Again, they're just kind of like chopping around here. Nothing. Not much going on in the markets. They're just kind of chopping around here. The new tariffs, obviously, it didn't even spook the markets now, right? The markets are actually right now, they're down the Dow is down about 177 points. And the NASDAQ, which is almost like the more important one to watch, because most of the companies of any significance these days are on the NASDAQ instead of the Dow. Like all the big tech companies are on the NASDAQ, not the Dow Jones. The Dow Jones used to be the industrial average, which is kind of like the manufacturing kind of thing, and industry and that. Whereas the NASDAQ is where all the big tech companies live.
It's Ford versus Google, isn't it? Really, but
there you go. You're talking about energy is Canada's superpower, and that's Tim Hodgson saying that. And Ottawa is committed to building infrastructure to get its energy products to market. And obviously, he was speaking in Calgary there. And he said it gives us the opportunity to build the strongest economy in the G7. One of the things he did say, to achieve that, Canada needs to build the necessary infrastructure, but also invest in carbon capture, methane reduction, and other technologies to ensure Canadian oil and gas is being produced responsibly. So, obviously, I think, Carney talked about it prior to his run and prior to, or in his run as PM, about carbon credits. That uranium one is going to come in a bit here, but you can go back to the other one. But anyway, and he says, Hodgson also said they require to finish that Pathways project, which is the carbon capture storage network in Alberta. There you go.
I mean, it was kind of one of those. He was like self-aware while he was doing it, but it was clearly it was a charm offensive. That he's been told to go there and to make Albertans swoon and Saskatchewans,
Wow.
to make them just to give them something to be happy about. And he even like referenced that. He was like, I came my first trip, and he was saying it was to Regina, I think, and it was like, that's not a coincidence or something, or that's not by accident. Like, it was all about trying to kind of suck up to the prairies, basically, and to the oil and gas industry.
If you are the energy minister, you better go where the energy is being produced.
Yeah, but I mean, from this particular government, or from this party, this political party, let's say, it was a new tone to adopt. It was something new to hear, because it was, I believe it was Wilkinson, wasn't it, before, who didn't. He was never that enthusiastic about energy, but I don't know. He said a lot of things, but he did also talk about electricity. East-west electricity lines. He worked for a hydro company in Ontario called Hydro One. He was in charge of it, actually. So he obviously knows his way around a grid. And he was talking a lot about that, and that makes sense. I think that's quite wise. But he was also talking about how, what we talked about yesterday, how Canadian energy can displace dirty energy around the world and bring down emissions, and how important it is to do that. And he also talked about a time in 1973, which I must admit I'm ignorant of, when the Americans commandeered or bought some oil that was going to go to Eastern Canada. They just took it off. It was during the oil embargo, during that oil crisis. They just took it off Canada, and Canada was just kind of left there like, the sad clown. And he was saying, I never want that to happen again. I want Canada to be completely energy self-sufficient and safe. And obviously that's not the case now. Even though Canada produces more oil than it consumes, that oil is produced in Alberta by and large, and can't be transported to the east without going through the US first.
And they buy it from the Middle East, right?
Yeah, exactly. They buy it from anywhere they can get it. They're very promiscuous about it in Quebec, aren't they? While finding the energy to condemn Alberta for some reason.
Well, I mean, if you want to do some carbon capture, you just buy a tree and put it in your backyard, and then send the federal government a bill for carbon capture.
Or you could just breathe. You could just breathe into a bottle, maybe, and then put the lid on. That's carbon capture, isn't it?
Plastic is actually carbon capture, because oil and gas is used to make the plastic, then it's captured in the plastic. So there you go.
Yeah, Danielle Smith was trying to, in vain, trying to discuss that about bitumen. She was trying to talk about that kind of thing at that Western conference, but I don't know. I don't know if Phoebe was listening.
It's kind of odd. You weren't even allowed to say these things just a while ago with the Trudeau Liberals, that you were a climate denier. If you even talked about selling LNG to other places that would actually reduce carbon emissions in the world, right? Like, that was just nonsense, according to Guilbeault. So there you go. Bank of Canada could cut about 3 times this year, too. There's quite a few people out there saying that the Bank of Canada is obviously going to cut here in the June one. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but it's highly probable that they cut here in June. And depending on what happens with, all these tariffs and stuff like that, although it seems to have really calmed right down for Canada right now.
Well, I mean, we're in a position where we have pretty high unemployment, a stagnating economy that needs life breathed into it, pretty low inflation, relatively speaking, and also lots of debt. So you think in those circumstances, get the rates cut, wouldn't you? You'd think it was just like a foregone conclusion. But
I don't think they have a choice. Yeah, and I forgot to mention, as far as energy goes, there's a lot of hot air in Ontario that could be maybe utilized, and that would be for me like Doug Ford.
Especially around here where I am.
In Ottawa, I think it's the epicenter of like helium or something.
We should capture that.
Yeah, Trump also signing an order there this morning on nuclear energy, and nuclear stocks definitely shot up this morning, even on the Canadian indexes. Denison Mines, we can put up that thing there. Denison Mines, which is one of the exploration type. Well, I mean, it's got some resources there, but it's not in production. I think part of theirs is in production. And Cameco, both of those stocks up dramatically this morning. I'm just trying to find it here. Denison right now is up 11%, and I believe Cameco is probably up around. Cameco, one of the biggest producers in the world, in Saskatchewan as well, and Denison Mines is also Saskatchewan. So yeah, so Cameco up about 9% this morning on this news from Donald Trump that they want to get nuclear energy going. So, and like, you know, in the U.S., lots of the nuclear stocks surged as he signed the executive order to speed up construction of reactors. And, you know, like some of the stuff down in the States jumped 25% and 18%. Constellation Energy. There you go. And that is the Defense Production Act declaring national emergency. They want to get a lot of reactors online, and that, you know, like even some of the big tech companies, I think they wanted to get, I think it was Microsoft wants to get 3 Mile Island going again. And there's a chart of where Cameco's operations are. Canada is one of the greatest miners in the world, and Cameco is one of Canada's, you know, like stellar companies too, Cameco. Big uranium company out of Saskatchewan.
As Timmy was saying there in Calgary just now, like Canada's best, he said it's just like it's the best in the world when it comes to mining. It has the best miners in the world, and that happens to be, for once, not necessarily an exaggeration by a politician. It is actually true, isn't it? I mean, Australia is quite famous as well, but
Tim must be watching the show because we've been saying that for how long? Canada is one of the richest resource nations in the world, and we have some of the best miners. I was a mine site controller. The bad thing is it takes 20 years to get a mine permitted. That's the sad thing. It takes 20 years to get a mine permitted. And I worked on site, and it's just hard to get anything done. It's just super hard to get anything done. And we have some of the best people too. The TSX is loaded with mining companies, but you know where most of them are? And I've interviewed quite a few of the very highly experienced miners here in Canada. They're B2 Gold, Clive, Beddoes. Most of their mines aren't in Canada. Yeah, and Silvercrest.
Mexico, Chile, places like that.
I interviewed the CEO for Silvercrest, Eric. Mexico. Because it's easier to get things done. So unless they fix that, like British Columbia's got a big problem with that. British Columbia, one of the hotbeds of mining, or was one of the hotbeds of mining, and Ontario as well. But
as soon as you try and do something, you get news stories like that one that we looked at, where it's BC First Nations fear that protests and conflict might result, or you get the Green Party, who usually have a disproportionate amount of power, saying, no, we don't like this at all. Or you get, you know, it's just like all of these pressure groups that they're so strong, aren't they? And that's why that's why you need the federal government. That's why you need a strong federal government to start coming and laying down the law a bit.
And fast-tracking stuff. I worked in a mine that we were building just south of Thompson, where the big Inco nickel mine is in Thompson itself. I mean, that's why Thompson's built, is because of that big nickel mine. But we were working on a smaller deposit in Waboden, which is about an hour south of Thompson. And that was bought out by the Chinese. There you go.
Many such cases, as Donald Trump would say.
There you go. Gold just kind of chunking around there, actually recovering a bit, the geopolitical stuff, and I think just in general, a lot of people trying to diversify, and gold, not the antiquated asset, or not dead, as some people would have called it, including our own government that sold all our gold reserves way back when, and Mark Carney was part of some of that when he was the Bank of Canada governor. Said it was an antiquated asset that is no longer necessary, and they sold it all for around $1,200. Oops.
Everyone makes mistakes, I guess. He did say that, didn't he? It's like, I've made a lot of mistakes and I'll make a lot more, or something along those lines. It's like, all right, well, at least you admit it. Bitcoin
broke a record, and now it's kind of backed off a bit. Like I said, that's the fight, right? That line, the new high is the fight. And it's broke out, did that new high, and then was about $111,000 or something like that, almost $112,000. And now it's backed off a bit, and now trading around 109. It's the close on the Friday and stuff has a big, this doesn't really actually close, so Bitcoin is one of the few assets that trades 24/7, 365. Hey?
Yeah,
Imagine
and
that.
it's very popular with all kinds of people, isn't it? Including assassins and all kinds of naughty people.
To be fair, that's what it used to be. But now a lot of the big investment firms in the United States, including there's ETFs on the exchanges in the United States for Bitcoin. A lot of people now, even the billionaires, are allocating a percentage of their assets towards the Bitcoin. And the Trump.
Didn't Trump say he's going to have a cryptocurrency strategic reserve or something?
Yeah, he talked about putting it as part of the national or their national reserves. So very favorable climate in the United States. Obviously, that's what you can see. If you can go back, look at that chart, and you go back, it's almost like halfway down the chart now. You can look at November, and you can see the jump, like you're right about there. That is the election. Not much word from the Carney liberals on Bitcoin. I mean, I know Justin Trudeau mocked Bitcoin a lot when Pierre Poilievre came out. Pierre Poilievre very silent on the Bitcoin, although in his disclosure, Pierre Poilievre is an owner of Bitcoin. I think he had about $10,000 worth of this stuff. So he did put his money where his mouth is. He did buy some Bitcoin.
So he's got like 1/11th of a Bitcoin.
Well, I don't know when he bought it. So if he bought it when it was 50,
yeah, true. It's probably a bit more than that. Yeah.
It's likely double, because when he was talking about it, don't forget Justin Trudeau made fun of him because he bought it. I think it was when he started talking, it was in the 70s, and it fell all the way into the 50s, right? And that was like if you can go back in time, that was a huge opportunity, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Canadian dollar. Again, looking for direction. Again, U.S. dollar weakness actually holding up the Canadian dollar right now. So
I'm surprised. I mean, I don't know if it's. Yeah, I mean, it does seem to be going up a little bit just today. And I wonder if that's in reaction to Hodgson, because that was. I mean, if you're a currency trader and you specialize in the loonie, that's going to get you excited, isn't it?
It's a resource currency for sure, and a favorable environment for resources would move that dollar higher.
And that was very strongly implied by Hodgson there. So
it's not rocket science. It's absolutely not rocket science. You want to stop the separatist talk in Alberta? Give them a pipeline. You want to increase the value of the U.S. dollar or the Canadian dollar? Be pro-resources. You want to help Canadians become more prosperous? Be pro-resource. Again, not rocket science, but apparently for the Trudeau Liberals, it was very much rocket science.
Well, they had, in their mind, they had a bigger fish to fry. They prioritized the concern about climate change over every other concern, including, trying to get rid of poverty in Canada, trying to diminish poverty in Canada.
Will they be the last one
I think
standing?
now we're getting to a point where we realize that maybe that shouldn't be the order of priorities.
Will Canada be the last one standing in this climate change thing? Now, New Zealand calling it a day. Obviously, America, the big player. The biggest economies right now, Canada. Canada. The United States, China, India. They're just going full steam.
Yeah. Well, the biggest one that I think of is Germany. They're all in. They're all in on net zero. And then the Brits, the British Labour Party. But they're very, very unpopular in Britain, the Labour Party. So I don't think they're going to be around very long. And when they're kicked out, I would say net zero will be history. So then that'll be Britain gone. So then it'll just be Canada and Germany, I guess.
Yeah. Let's move on to our technology, transportation, kind of like that AI thing. Former Brit, like that's huge news what's going on there with your fellow former countryman there, Johnny Ive. Like he was definitely at the forefront with Apple there when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, and that meeting with Johnny there when he said, design me something that just blows me away, and there you go, and they created the iPhone. Johnny Ive turned that into billions of dollars. And we're going to play a little clip here from CNBC talking about Johnny.
Hi, Kelly. So we're hearing that OpenAI has now agreed to buy Johnny Ive's AI startup. It's called IO Products. It's a roughly $6.4 billion deal. Ives is legendary in Silicon Valley. He's best known for designing the iPhone, the Mac, iPod, and iPad, as well as Apple Watch. So really an iconic designer. $6.4 billion deal. It's going to be all equity. OpenAI already owns about 23% of the firm, so they're going to be putting in another roughly $5 billion. It is a massive price tag and a massive deal. In startup land, OpenAI itself, if you think about the valuation, it's about $300 billion in terms of the price tag. This company, IO, Johnny Ive's company, does not have any devices on the market yet, we should mention. Very early stage startup. It is a signal, though, that OpenAI is right now leaning into devices. They're willing to pay billions to officially have Johnny Ive to do it. It is a
How do you like that? No devices, and Johnny Ive cashing, ringing. You know what? He's making music better than the Beatles, like cashing in bigger than the Beatles, cashing in bigger than a lot of Brits. Definitely, you know, we talk about sometimes how the Brits aren't leading in the AI space, but Johnny Ive rang that cash register, right? We got a little. Here's the thing, Johnny Ive. You can put up that next slide there. Former Apple chief designer. And definitely when he's as a young man there, the iPhone, you know, like huge deal for him. And then obviously all his other products. And then he worked for Tim Cook, obviously later. I don't know, like how much innovation do you think, since Steve Jobs' death, how much has Apple innovated, like launched new products? Not a lot. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know.
What year did he die now?
I think it was
2011.
Yeah,
so
but if you think,
not very much, because that was the iPad had already been launched then, and the iPad is of sort of the iPad's not exactly like first tier for Apple, I wouldn't say.
It's just a bigger just a bigger phone, right? It's just a bigger phone.
I mean, usually what people say is AirPods, because they've been so successful, haven't they? That's probably it, isn't it?
And then the watch, I guess, but I mean, it's just a smaller phone.
People don't get very excited about the watch. I don't find, like, the way people get excited about iPhones and MacBook Pros and stuff like that.
I have tried the glasses, Apple Vision, like absolutely amazing. Just a little heavy to wear, but like unbelievable with some of the stuff they've recorded with it. It's almost like a godlike experience where you feel like you're in the situation. Like it's if you haven't had a chance to try them when you go into an Apple store, just try them. They let you try them out. They're pretty amazing. They're pretty pricey though too, right? I think they're $6,000 or something like that. Where Metas aren't quite as good, but they're like 1/10 the price. So Meta Vision.
But I think Apple's problem, it's not even a hardware problem, is it? At this point, it's more software. I think they're starting to be left behind by a lot of other companies, and that's the worry. I mean, things like the Apple Intelligence, like that has not got a particularly good reputation, has it?
An ironic name for sure. Apple Intelligence. Obviously, Johnny wasn't a part of that. He's a designer, though. He's more of like the making it do it thing. But here's a little timeline for some people. But it goes right to left. Of course, 1983. I remember I had a phone like that. I had one of the first bricks. So they were very, very heavy, right? Very, very heavy. And then the flip phone. And my daughter says, like, she says now, and if you jump ahead to 2007, you'll see the iPhone there, but then you see the progression of the phone. And it's quite quick. The timeline gets condensed as it moves forward. And my daughter says, as she drives a Tesla, she said, basically, she understands now that everybody else is driving a flip phone, and she's driving an iPhone. That's the difference. So.
I remember when I first got my hands on an iPhone, and it felt so, like, counterintuitive because there were no buttons. It was so hard to, like, get used to that at first, but
so I was at the mine site at the time, and I bought one of the first iPhones in Canada. And I went to the mine site, and I had my BlackBerry. Everybody at the site had 8380 Blackberries to communicate with each other with the QWERTY keyboard. And I showed off the iPhone to people there, and they're just like, "That's stupid. Like, where's the keyboard? Like, how are you supposed to do that? That's just ridiculous." I said, "It has the internet." And there's like, wow, the BlackBerry has the internet, and it did. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, the internet on it was like, it was as silly as it could get, and the screen was this. But I'm just like, you should try using it for a while, and then, you know what I mean? So I actually had both for a while, because the MindSight phone was the BlackBerry, and my personal phone was the iPhone. And then I think a couple of, because it was 2 weeks in and 1 out for me, and I came back, and then somebody at that point, BlackBerry responded with the torch. I don't know if you remember the torch from BlackBerry. That was basically, they torched the company at that point. They basically, that was the end of BlackBerry, which was RIM. RIM was one of Canada's biggest darling stocks, right? I think it was well over $100. And they launched this thing called the Torch, which looked like, you're gonna love this, it looked like the iPhone. I don't know if anybody else remembers that's watching. Looked like the iPhone, but the screen, they called it interactive. When you pushed on the screen, it dented in, and they said it was an interactive screen. It felt broken to me when somebody showed it to me. Look at this, it's got an interactive screen. I'm just like, it feels broken, right? And then the biggest problem it had, when you put it to your ear, it actually went off. Get shut down.
Oh, no.
So that was the end of RIM. I think the stock went down to like $10, like quite quickly, as the iPhone started to proliferate. And then I had lots of people calling me at the time, just like, look at the buy of RIM right now. It's so cheap. It's like, it used to be over $100, and now it's like, I think it was like $11, $12. And I said, well, if you think it's a bargain now, just wait a bit. It'll get cheaper yet. And yeah, it did not do well. I think it still trades, though. They have a lot of patents and stuff like that, RIM.
Yeah, well, it's like Nokia as well. That's still going, but they're not ahead in the phone world. It must be something else that they're doing.
I have no idea. There you go. There's your history of the torch the world. But yeah, that changed the world. The iPhone, absolutely, right? Google
certainly changed the world of devices, didn't it? Knocked out so many big players.
Well, including our industry, news. It changed news. Like, that was the death blow for newspapers right there, because the newspaper was in your hand, right?
Yeah.
Music too, like people.
So many different.
Radio too.
Ultimately, camera companies would suffer as well, wouldn't they? And all sorts of companies.
Radio, television. Everything is like on your screen. Like, watch people. Just watch people in an elevator. Watch people everywhere. People walk into traffic with a stupid thing in their hand. So Google obviously stuck its face back into the AI world too. Google obviously deep pockets. Like they ring that cash register. If you ran, you know how that debt clock runs. You can go to the website. You can see the debt clock run. You know, just kind of like keeps going. And Google, that's how their cash register goes. Google makes a ton of money, and I think it's one of the biggest, most trafficked website, I believe, is still YouTube. The YouTube, you can learn anything on the YouTube.
It's also a massive asset for them now that they're going big style into AI, because they can use YouTube to train. Like most humans do that. They use YouTube to train themselves how to like fix a pipe or something like that. But now they can get their AI to do that, can't they? And they have proprietary access to all of that.
Yeah, and then Elon Musk, this is Sawyer Merritt. He follows Elon quite well. And Elon is stepping away from politics, and I think he realizes that there's lots of competition out there, and he needs to get his stuff to market, and Optimus is one of the big ones, right? And then, you know, somebody's saying if Elon stepped away to focus on his companies, which is, you know, some of the leading companies in the world, and Elon says bang on.
Right, what he's saying there, what the conversation is actually about, is that the Republican Party is so stupid that they're going to add to the debt and spend so much money that the only way to save the United States is through massive GDP growth. Yeah. And then that's what Elon Musk is saying. In other words, that's like saying Doge in some ways can't be the only weapon to try and save the United States.
Well, they did come out
from a financial perspective.
Scott Bassett did say that this morning. I don't know if we played that full clip, but he did say that in that interview, that there's, you know, like we talk about it all the time with BC, like there's two ways to fix the budget. Increase revenues and decrease expenses, you know what I mean? Or a balance of, right? So obviously, if you have an army of robots, GDP goes through the roof.
Yeah. But that's
per
the thing. There are
capita,
lots of ways to increase revenue, aren't there? And sadly, what mediocre, incompetent politicians tend to do these days to increase revenue is increase taxes rather than try to promote growth.
Which actually kills growth. Increasing taxes
the Laffer curve
chases capital away. Like if we let the a union president there talk more, that'll be even more people fleeing Canada.
Well, it's been tried. We've seen the experiments run in places like Cuba, and maybe Cuba's not the best example, but Venezuela, certainly. Look at Venezuela. I mean, that's how you do it in the most dramatically bad way. But there are even countries somewhere in the middle where there's been capital flight. You've got to be smart about it, haven't you?
Yeah. Trump just hired the tech genius you never heard of. This guy created the Microsoft Cloud, built Twitter with Elon, and took Facebook past 1 billion users. So there's a lot of really smart guys like trying to get stuff done in the United States. Love them or hate them, some stuff is getting done. And where are we attracting these guys? Like I know Melanie Jolie says that we're going to attract all these Harvard people. I seen like Harvard getting shut down by Kristi Noem. They're saying they're not getting allowed to have foreign students there because they're not adhering to what the government's asking them to do. And then a Canadian journalist wrote that, well, then just move Harvard to Canada. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they just move the whole thing to Canada?
I'm sure they would keep their endowment, which is about the size of
Canada's GDP.
Ontario's GDP or something.
And then here's Jolie. She was talking. I was going to put it in, but I didn't want to listen to her again. But they're definitely. She says they're going to bring back the EV rebates. They said they promised that in the campaign. So, but again, Melanie, maybe Kristi, you can just tell her if you don't drop that EV mandate, there will be no auto sector in Canada. Just a clue.
But she's also talking about that every time she opens her mouth. She says, like, a fundamental part of her economic strategy and her government's economic strategy is to attract talent from the US. Yeah. And she even said in this little address to the press here that you've got a screen grab of, she even said, I'm not naive. She said those exact words, I am not naive. Well, why are you acting like somebody that's naive then? If you're not naive. Also, it's one of those things, if you have to say, I'm not naive, then you're probably naive, aren't you?
Isn't that the playbook? You just deny it, right? What's actually happening? We've seen that over and over and over again, haven't we?
Indeed. Like here, yeah. But she also said, I'm pragmatic. That's news to me.
That's news to me as well. So yeah, we got that section right now. We could have put her in here. It's the Are You Serious section. Into that with the carbon tax, didn't we? That the carbon tax did not affect inflation. You know, who said that? You know, who said it didn't? Bank of Canada, Stats Canada, Climate, the Canadian Climate Institute, Prosperity Institute, and literally hundreds of economists. Well, there was 200 of them that signed that letter. And Stephen Guilbeault, definitely, Justin Trudeau. And Justin Trudeau even said, even if you can't afford your rent or can't afford groceries, knowing that the climate is much more important than that.
But they're not naive.
No. So there you go. There's a good one. Whoops. Another whoops, eh? Whoopsie. And then we got a clip here to play. We put this in here too because this is for the elbows up crowd.
At the leaders' debate, Mark Carney's closing comments were this.
We're all going to stand up against Donald Trump. I'm ready. I've managed crises over the years. I've built strong economies. We will fight back with counter tariffs. We will protect our workers and those businesses, and we will build the strongest economy.
But just one day before that, he had met with his cabinet and canceled the tariffs on the U.S., those retaliatory tariffs that came into effect after Liberation Day. This is an internal document that was published in the Canadian Gazette on May 7th. It shows that Mark Carney and his cabinet met to cancel the retaliatory tariffs. Those elbows up tariffs on the US, all was a lie. He had the gall to look Canadians in the eye during the leaders' debate in an election and say something he knew was not true.
We are facing the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. We're all going to stand up against Donald Trump.
Whoopsie.
Whoopsie indeed.
Whoopsie. Another whoopsie. Maybe we should call this segment Whoopsie.
I tell you what, another whoopsie there is that comment that he made, which I noticed at the time. I think we discussed it at the time, where he said, "I've built successful economies." Central banks don't build economies. I
Whoopsie.
mean, what a cheeky thing that is to say, like self-aggrandizing thing to say.
Yeah. Whoopsie. This one here, if Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump there, I destroyed the Soviet Union. I'm sure everybody remembers Ronald Reagan saying, "Gorbachev, tear down that wall." There you go.
He did, yeah.
Do you remember Mikhail Gorbachev? He had that, I think, the planet
Indeed.
on his head there. Right?
Birthmark, yeah.
There you go. I've been to the Berlin Wall. I'm sure you have too. I bought a piece of it actually.
That's amazing. How much did that cost?
They sell you a little piece of the concrete. I don't even know. And I can't remember. It's like, I was at Checkpoint Charlie there in West Berlin, and they sell it to you as a tourist. And yeah.
I'm sure it's not just like old Fritz's garden wall that he's decided to dismantle.
They're making it in the back with little bags or whatever. I don't know. They probably had enough of it left over and say, hey, you know what? That's entrepreneurship, right? And the joke, I was in Germany for a bit, and my friend was there, and he says, the joke was when they tore down the wall. And this is a joke because we're in the joking section. And he said the joke was, if you're living in West Berlin and you can't find your car, an East German stole it. Because when they tore down that wall, the West Germans were very wealthy, and the East Germans obviously not, right? So there was a bit of work that Germany had to do to kind of equalize that, and it was very painful for many of the West Germans. They didn't like it. That down they were sharing.
They spent something like I think it's over $1 trillion. I can't remember what the sum is, but they really went at that in a typically sort of German way, like very obsessive and systematic. And they tried their hardest, but obviously it hasn't quite succeeded, and there's still a massive divide. And if you look at the last election, you look at the election map, the East is almost entirely AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, which is that party that's now being investigated by the federal government, and the federal government have said that they're like I can't remember what they said, like a terrorist organization or something, or a racist organization. That's an extremist organization. So obviously it didn't quite work out in the end. They didn't quite harmonize the two Germanys.
I was in Finland as well, in Helsinki, which was ruled by the Russians. I can't get the number right, maybe like 100 years. I think the Russians ruled over Finland, and then when they left, they kept an island just off the coast of Finland. And I can't remember the year it was. Maybe it's 2010 or something like that. And Russia wanted to give that island back to the Finns, and they didn't want it. Because Finland has this thing where they have to equalize, just like East and West Germany, where they have to kind of give everybody the same standard of living, and it was very poor, the island. They didn't want to bring them up to a standard of living that was required by Finland.
Yeah, there's a few examples of that. Like the Russians also, I believe, tried to get rid of Kaliningrad, that borders Poland and also Lithuania, I think. It's like this really strange, tiny little patch of land that's like inside of Europe, basically. They tried to get rid of that and didn't succeed. That's like it's an old remnant of Prussia, of the Prussian Empire, if you remember that from your history class.
I don't. Sorry, 1 second. Just want to make sure I get this right before I'm asking my friend. So Alaska was purchased from Russia by the United States. Look at the price tag. You remember that price tag? That was quite the buy. Why didn't Canada buy?
Not very much.
$7.2 million. At that point,
that was a genuine question that was raised, actually.
Yeah, it was.
But that's because the British treated Canada or British North America with total contempt. They didn't take it seriously at all. So they always gave land away to the Americans or whoever.
So yeah, they bought it for $7.2 million in 1867, and on March 30th. Look at that. That was a pretty good.
They also bought the Mississippi, the Louisiana Purchase, which is like basically the best farmland on earth. They also got that off the French for not very much.
Yeah, there you go. And Alaska is very rich in resources. I think, the Trump administration just did that deal with the Japanese for some LNG, a deal that we said we didn't want to do because there's no future for LNG.
Smart.
Incredibly economically sound. And we did that because in Kelowna here, we had that golf fight. Remember that we played that a while ago where those people golfing went at her pretty good? Well, it turns out golf is not the only contact sport or the sport that seems to be fairly tame. Pickleballers also want to mix it up. Here's this clip here from the internet on a couple of pickleballers getting at it. You can probably kill the ball. The guy doesn't even want to fight fair. He's using his racket to go at it, right? Maybe he thinks the guy's There you go.
To be honest, that's what you get when you fall over because of your own punch. If you're going to do that, you're going to get smacked on the head, aren't you, with a racket?
Ah, well, there you go. Golf and pickleball, now contact sports, right? You think that, and the guy there doesn't even fight. He's using his pickleball racket as a weapon.
I suppose you got to do something to have fun while you play those sports.
Yeah, it's taken over for tennis for lots of people because I guess people don't like running around. I love tennis, but apparently I've never played pickleball. But apparently these people are the people that love pickleball. I would imagine, I haven't played it, so I can't say for sure. I imagine it's a slower, less demanding sport than tennis.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, I've never played pickleball either, but I would imagine that's right.
There you go. In the Biden family, this is the one, we haven't done a Babylon Bee one for a bit, but the Biden family actually, with all this fallout from Jake Tapper's original Sin book, are really worried they might be running out of time to exploit Joe Biden. Yeah. That's sad, eh?
Well, I mean, it's funny and it's a joke, obviously, but I can't find it all that funny because the premise of that joke is that Biden is this innocent old man. But Biden, he's always been a bit of a sort of slippery figure throughout his entire career, ever since he became a senator when he was like 30 or something like that. He's always been a bit of a sort of cheeky, sort of slimy guy. So I reckon he's in on anything that's going on. He's been in on it.
If you want to read some excerpts from the book, Megyn Kelly's got quite a few of them out there. I don't know if it's available online if anybody wants to buy it, but there's some pretty damning revelations in that book. Pretty bad.
Wow, yeah. It just what we saw in front of our eyes, front of our nose was bad enough, really, wasn't it? That they propped him up like that.
Again, if we think of it this way, if that book was written by Jesse Waters of Fox News, it would get nothing, no credibility whatsoever, would it? Peter Ducey, those kind of guys. It would just be an absolute, joke, and they would forget it, right? And they'd say that's just nonsense. But here it is, one of the prominent, I think the most prominent guy on CNN, Jake Tapper, who professes to be one of these, very virtuous guys. And Alex, I can't forget his name, from Axios, two guys that are, on the left side of it, write this book, and then it's very hard for them to defend against it. Although The View is definitely going up against it and saying that it's just, terrible lies. Who would have thought?
They're usually the last bastion, aren't they, for anyone?
And of course, Don Lemon there defending as well. Don Lemon, the most irrelevant guy on the planet, you know what I mean? He had his shot too. Elon Musk gave him a shot, and he just decided that he couldn't get past himself, and there you go.
Yeah, decided to try and ambush Elon.
Yeah, usually doesn't work out, right? Anyway, that's our show for the week. We hope you enjoyed it. We're at 104 minutes. That's pretty good, eh?
Wow, it's
Lots of good stuff
like a
in there,
movie.
Lots of good stuff in there, though. Uranium.
Yeah.
Uranium, and geraniums, right? It's hot. I've been a big uranium believer for a long time ago. Lost my shirt, basically, on the day Fukushima happened, though, because I was a big uranium bull. And that was a terrible day for both Japan and Fukushima, and for uranium resource stocks around the world. They went into hibernation for a long, long time, because that was supposedly the end of uranium. That's why I bring it up. That was supposedly the end of any type of future reactors or anything of that sort. But Canada, again, leading in the technology with small modular reactors. Canada leads in so many ways. It's just that it's been suppressed by...
I don't think we lead in political administration, unfortunately.
No, we don't. We definitely... that's what's been the problem. The people that have been leading here in our leading industries have definitely put a lid on our resource sector.
Yeah, I think that's hard to argue with.
Time for somebody to take the lid off the pot and unleash the beast, but we shall see. With that said, we do thank you for watching, especially the regulars that come every day. That's great. Love it. And we'll see you Monday, 9 a.m. Cheers.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.